Hey, greetings from New York. Welcome all to our webinar, Faculty Panel on Admissions. This public webinar is a part of the Cientifico Latino Inc. Graduate Student Mentorship Initiative curriculum and is being recorded. To those of you who attended earlier, our workshop earlier, welcome again. I am Dr. Dennis Melendez, your host and program director at Cientifico Latino. And now I'll just take a moment to introduce our panelists, beginning with Jennifer Hunter. As an assistant dean in the Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, Jennifer promotes Rice University as a premier place for graduate study. She helps graduate students reach their full potential by coordinating and offering opportunities designed to supplement the graduate programs themselves. She is proud to work with Fulbright and graduate student ambassador groups. Next, Dr. Sabrina Jedlicka is an associate professor with PC Rossin College of Engineering and Applied Science and Deputy Provost of Graduate Education for Lehigh University, where she focuses on admission, educational innovation and effectiveness, and institutional policy in graduate education. She has spent the majority of her career at Lehigh as a faculty member in the Department of Bioengineering and the Department of Materials Science and Engineering. Prior to her current post as Deputy Provost, she spent several years as an Associate Dean in the Rossin College, overseeing undergraduate and graduate academic affairs. She also teaches courses, online and in person, to undergraduate and graduate students, and actively manages a research lab, focusing primarily in biosystems. And last but not least, Dr. Mariam Ali is an acting associate professor of psychology at UC Berkeley. She received her education and training at the University of Toronto, UC Davis, and Princeton University. She studies how memory contributes to attention, perception, and prediction. Her achievements have been recognized with an NSF Career Award, APS Rising Star Award, BBRF Young Investigator Award, and the Presidential Award for Outstanding Teaching. She is passionate about destigmatizing mental illness and promoting fairer and more supportive spaces for students. So thank you all so much for being here with us today. I'll give you the floor now to talk a little bit about yourselves and your personal experience with graduate admissions. Let's begin with Jennifer.
Right. Thank you so much, Dennis. It's really great to be here today. As he said, I am an assistant dean in the Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies at Rice University. I have the most fun job because I get to talk to prospective students about all the things that they want to do with their wonderful lives and help them make that decision. So give them really good information so that they can make the best decision for themselves, whether that's grad school or not, whether that's Rice or not. And the way that I do that is a few different things, but the biggest one is our grad student ambassadors program. So we run a program that current students share their unique experiences with prospective students. We really want to make sure that the range of stories that graduate students have are shared with those that are interested in maybe pursuing graduate studies. So that's a little bit about me and my role. I don't actually sit on an admissions committee currently, but I do read a lot of applications. I am always looking for students who are well-rounded, who are excited about their field of study and who want to give back to the institutions that they are planning to attend. So really looking forward to hearing from all of you on what you're interested in, hearing from my fellow panelists on their experience as well, and really grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you. Sabrina.
Yeah, so I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you, Dennis, for the opportunity. And if I just want to talk a little bit about, again, my general background and how I ended up being a deputy provost for graduate education, which I'm still trying to figure out what that actually means, because I think it's an evolving role. So graduate education at Lehigh has always been around, but it has always been somewhat under the radar, right? And that we have a very strong set of undergraduate programs, and graduate students have, served as TAs and researchers and everything else in this, mixture of programs that we have across the university. That being said, very few people have elevated graduate education broadly at the institutional level because it sits so locally out within the academic units. And so the job that I have is really to elevate graduate education more broadly across the globe, talk to people about how great Lehigh is. But the thing that I really enjoy that I relate to Jennifer around is not just talking to people about Lehigh, but talking to people about their goals, right? Because graduate studies, whether it's a master's degree or a PhD, it's a commitment. And it's something that you want to find the best place for you, the best program to meet your goals. And not every institution is going to be able to offer that to you. And so I enjoy learning about what other universities have to offer, their mentorship and training philosophies, the sorts of programs and courses that we don't have access to here, so that when I talk to students, I can say to them, oh, you're interested in food science. We don't have that here, but these are the 4 universities that you should definitely look at. And here are 4 faculty to go along with that inquiry journey. Because ultimately, I want to make sure that students find what's best for them. And so I do serve on evaluation committees in the College of Engineering, specifically material science and bio-E. But I've also evaluated applicants from across the institution, oftentimes as an arbiter of the students who might be sitting on an edge of an acceptance. And looking at applications in fields that are very different from my own to try and provide the insight and balance that a program might need if they're looking at a candidate who came from a very different institution than Lehigh or a different country than the US. And so my personal process when I look at students, either evaluating them for my own lab or for programs across the university, is going to be, are they curious enough to take things outside of their major? Right? Because the curiosity really, really matters as you get into graduate studies. But also, what else do they bring besides a great GPA? Great GPAs are everywhere. What else do they bring to the table? Are they going to be a contributor to Lehigh at large? Or are they going to be someone who really embraces what Lehigh has to offer? And if the answers to those questions are generally yes, I usually will look to the student as a favorable candidate for admissions. And so I will stop there.
Thank you so much. And now, Mariam.
Great. Thank you so much for having me here, Dennis, for organizing. And I'm really happy to be on this panel with Jennifer and Sabrina because I think the 3 of us have different backgrounds, experiences, and roles. So hopefully we can cover a lot of different ground. So I'm faculty at UC Berkeley. I've served on admissions committees in psychology and neuroscience. And they work a little bit differently. And so I might focus on that because I think it's different from what you've heard Sabrina and Jennifer talk about. And so in my role, I'm primarily interested in evaluating candidates for their fit with our research programs in psych and neuro. And one key difference is that in neuroscience, there is an admissions committee that will select the top candidates for admission to the program as a whole. And then the students do rotations in their first year before selecting a lab, meaning that they're not admitted to work in a specific lab. They decide on the lab later. Whereas in psychology, which is my home department, students are admitted to work with a specific faculty member. And so that means that I approach admissions maybe in a different way than other people might because I'm primarily interested in evaluating the candidate's very specific research fit with me rather than contributions to the program or the school as a whole. And so when I evaluate students for their fit with my lab in psychology, I'm looking for things like, are they curious about the same types of research questions as what we address in my lab? Do they show passion and curiosity and willingness to learn? Are they curious about the work we're doing, generative with ideas and questions? And do they have some of the skills that are going to be important just to kind of get started in the lab? Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So now we can move into our questions. And the format is that we have 30 minutes roughly to answer the series of questions that I have for each of you to give some input. And for question 1, many of you already kind of touched on this, but feel free to elaborate. How are personal statements and statements of purpose evaluated? What makes one stand out? And I just want to note before we get into answering that question, which I'm posting in the chat, just do be mindful that we try to keep our answers to around 2 minutes so that we can have some time to field questions at the end. Let's begin with Mariam.
Sure. So I feel strongly that I can teach people a lot of skills, but I can't teach them like passion and curiosity for the specific field. And so I really look for people who show that they are really curious about their chosen field of study so that they have questions, in my case, about memory, how we use memories to guide our behavior and prediction. And even if their research background isn't exactly in that space, if they show that they've read and thought about why they're interested in these questions and why my lab is a good fit, then I'm really curious about them as a candidate. And so when I evaluate the personal statements, I look for their ability to clearly describe their interests and goals, their sense of what they want to study, how they've made the most of the opportunities that they've had, even if they weren't exactly the opportunities that would align with what the work I do in my lab is. So have they taken the opportunity to learn particular skills like statistics or programming that are useful in my field, whether it's in classes or self-taught or something else? Um, and really looking for how much they've thought about why they want to work with me in my lab at Berkeley. And so there, usually at the personal statement, there's a paragraph at the end that is customized for each school or program. And in the case of psychology, it's also customized to the faculty member they're applying for because they're admitted to work in a specific lab. And that paragraph really matters a lot for me because I want to see whether they really have thought deeply about why they want to spend 5 years working with me. So, are there specific papers they liked? Is there something specific about my research program they liked that makes them a good fit?
Thank you. So for the questions, I see that there are some questions coming in for in the webinar chat. Please input the questions into the Q&A panel so that we can monitor them. The chat will be just for the panelists and myself to post any relevant links and to post the questions. So thank you. Jennifer.
Yeah, so when I read applications, the statement of purpose is the piece that actually I'm most interested in, because that's really your chance to talk to an admissions committee or maybe an admitting faculty member directly. So I'm always looking to see what students do with that space, with the space that's given to them in this essay. I'm looking for people who have a clear idea of their academics. I'm not an academic, but I want to know that they have done their research, that they are looking for faculty members that are at Rice that fit with the research that they want to do, and also that they have a real passion for this. So they have a spark that's led them to this field, and then they know what they want to do with this afterwards. You don't always have to have it all figured out. You don't always need, this is what my thesis is going to be on, and this is my subfield. A lot of times, as Mariam was saying, you can come into a cohort and kind of figure out your direction as you go through those first couple of years of grad school. But to have an idea for this is why I'm doing it, as Sabrina mentioned, this is a commitment. It's a time commitment, especially for PhD. It can be 4 to 6 years. So do you know what you're getting into? Do you have perseverance and grit and resilience to have days where your experiments are not always going to go right? Is that going to be something that you can handle and work through? So I'm always looking for students that have those characteristics, that are excited about the research environment at Rice, that know and have demonstrated knowledge about that research environment, and then have a clear direction, or at least an idea of what they end up wanting to do. So those are the big things that I look for. Certainly, if there are other things that shine through those essays, that's a great thing, especially when it comes to maybe any fellowships you've won. Maybe you want to point those out. The CV is a great place for that, but you might want to mention those things in your statement of purpose. And then also anything that makes you a well-rounded candidate that fits within the framework of this essay is a great thing to mention. That's what I am always looking for, students that are going to be contributors on campus and are going to be really well-rounded. They're going to get out of the lab. I'm excited about reading those essays.
Great. So we have Sabrina.
So As I think about personal statements, right, similar to Mariam and Jennifer, this is your opportunity to talk to an admissions committee or talk to a specific faculty member about your interest in the program, the lab, et cetera. Now, from a broad perspective, right, every admissions committee, every department that you're going to apply to, no matter if you're applying just to psychology across the nation, every single one of them is going to be structured a little bit differently. And every one of them is going to be evaluating your application in a different way. That's, I think, one of the beautiful things about graduate school, but it's also one of the really frustrating things as an applicant that you may run into. And so when I look at a personal statement, I am looking for a couple of things, right? One is your story. I want to get to know you, right? If there is something that led you to this moment, I want to know what it is. Because to me, that tells me a lot about your passion, your interests, potentially your resilience in the face of, again, whatever you may have had to go through to find yourself wanting to enter a life of research, which is a lot as a PhD student. Um, the other thing that I look for, and this is, I think, a little bit more tailored, maybe in the engineering realm, is how you anticipate that degree, that graduate's program of study, moving you into where you want to go in life. You know, when you think about your future goals, you think about the sort of company, industry, problems that you want to work on, that personal statement is your opportunity to tell us those things. And for me, I find that to be something that's truly authentic. And it's hard to get AI to generate something that is so specific to you, your goals, and your interests. And so I look for your story and I look for your future and everything else in between. I always tell students, like, you fill that out the way that you want to, right? What do you want people to know about you? Um, but another thing I get asked all the time by students about their personal statement is if a program asks them for their research goals, they ask me, am I committed to this? Because this is something that I absolutely have to do for 5 years. No, no, no. Nope, not at all. I can tell you my own research statement going into graduate school had nothing to do what I ended up doing my dissertation on. But it provided the story, it demonstrated the passion, and it showed the clarity of thought that was needed to be able to get admitted.
Great. So now our question is going to be really geared towards uh, a space that many of our attendees are occupying. How do you assess applicants from non-traditional or underrepresented backgrounds? And Sabrina, I'll let you begin.
Yeah, so it's a tricky question because in many universities we are actually, and Lehigh included, we're actually not allowed to include that information in the application packet that gets released to the faculty. It is, again, part of institutional and individual protections that we try to enable across our campus. That being said, um, when we look at applicants who are coming from very non-traditional academic backgrounds or potentially underrepresented students, we look at the following, right? One, and similar to everything else, curiosity and passion, right? What led the student to that particular moment in time? And I think that, again, it's really important to tell your story at that application stage because it does make you stand out as an individual. And the second is I will oftentimes look at applicants, into my lab who are coming from different fields, coming from different areas. And so I classify that as somewhat non-traditional, right? And that it's not an engineering student applying for an engineering PhD, but rather potentially I've had a psychology student apply for an engineering PhD in my lab. And I look at those in a way that I ask the question, am I able to ensure that the student can be successful by providing the necessary training early in their PhD to bring them up to the level to pass qualifying exams and all of the things that doctoral students have to go through. But all that being said, curiosity and tell your story, those things really, really matter as a non-traditional or underrepresented student because they speak to us on a personal level.
Thank you. Jennifer? You're muted, Jennifer.
Sorry, I think I'm on a little bit of a lag, so I hope I'm coming through.
You
Okay,
are.
am I the next person, or was that the right
Yes.
call? Okay. One thing I wanted to kind of double back on that Sabrina had mentioned, which is absolutely true. You know, we don't get the faculty that are on the admissions committee does not get all of the information in the application package. And so sometimes students will say, well, why am I being asked on the application for certain demographic information? And the reason is that we are required by the government to supply data to the government at some point. So that's why you're being asked those questions, but no one on the admissions committee is actually seeing some of that data. And that's why it's so important to take all of the space on the application to tell your unique story. I think the SOP is a great mechanism to do that, to share all of your experiences and maybe any hardships that you have faced, things that we should know about that will contextualize your application for the admissions committee. I think that's very important as well. So that's what I would share briefly about this topic.
You, Mariam.
Yeah, as I was thinking about answering this question, I realized that I have a lot of students that I've mentored over the years who've come from non-traditional paths, and they've been some of the best students that I've had. And I think one reason for that is that often people from non-traditional paths have a huge amount of passion for the field that they've chosen. Um, Sometimes, in more traditional paths, it's like the reasonable next step even if you don't have the highest passion for it. Whereas the students I know from non-traditional paths have really gone out of their way to do everything they can to find themselves in this spot. So they are some of the best students I've had. And that usually comes through in the statement of purpose, how they found their chosen career path, their chosen area of study, what led them to that point is usually very interesting and shows how deeply they've thought about why they want to be here at this time. And to the extent that you can do that, it can make for a very compelling statement. Um, in terms of evaluation, so again, I'm focusing here on the content that people are choosing to share in their statements. And so the idea here is I try to evaluate what the student has done with the resources and opportunities and experiences that they've had. And so when you compare applicants, I don't compare the absolute amount of work the person has produced or the experiences that they've had because people start at different points. And so it's not really fair to just count the number of labs the person has been in, the number of poster presentations they've had or papers they've had. It's always how much have they done given the opportunities that they've had. And so people who have gone out of their way to find any bit of research experience, despite having to work jobs, teach themselves programming or other kinds of things, show a huge amount of motivation that is really important for a PhD student. And so that's kind of what I look for is that making the most out of any opportunities that you've had and trying to find opportunities, teaching yourself what you can if you didn't have the opportunity to be in labs and that kind of thing.
Awesome. And that's actually a great segue into our third question. So I think I'll leave it open to you to just continue to speak on this topic. But how should applicants without extensive research experience strengthen that part of their application?
Should I keep going or?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so if you don't have a lot of research experience, but you've acquired a lot of skills that are useful in the research setting, those are useful to highlight. So if you taught yourself programming if you took a course that allows you to do research-related activities, in my case, it would be things like programming an experiment for human participants, um, working with data, taking statistics classes or programming classes. Sometimes those classes can give you a lot of the hands-on kinds of experiences that are useful in research settings, even if you haven't been in a lab. So sometimes people will highlight things like, I took a neuroimaging course and we analyzed publicly available data. I learned to use this software. This is what I found. Or I took a course where we programmed experiments and collected data. And those are really useful examples to see of research aptitude, even if you haven't had a lot of experience in a research lab. So I think it's all about focusing on the skills that you've learned in whatever setting, self-taught, coursework, anything else that are useful in a research setting.
Sabrina.
I think you said my name. So 100% agree, right? Students who don't have extensive research experience can still be very qualified to enter a graduate program. And again, oftentimes what I'll be looking for with a student who doesn't have any research listed in their CV or their personal statement is going to be an explanation of how they think classwork that they have done could contribute to the work that they intend to do in a graduate program. And so things like taking a data science class that may not be required for your program, or looking at programming maybe slightly differently, taking an extra programming class or an extra statistics class, depending on the field you plan to move into. I think that all of those things show a dedication to potentially pursuing research, even if you were not one of the fortunate students who had either the means, the opportunity, or the time to be able to do research as an undergraduate student in your institution. And I think we collectively across higher ed do understand that those opportunities don't come to everyone, right? Those are not opportunities that are universal, and they are things that are oftentimes um, delegated to a select few. And so show off how your coursework has contributed to you wanting to go further in your education.
Thank you.
I have absolutely no notes. My colleagues covered pretty much every aspect of this, and I would just echo what they have said. Coursework is a really huge part of the application that we're looking at. Like, what kind of courses have you taken? But then also think about things like senior design. Have you taken design classes? Are there things that are project driven that you can show in your application? And again, research experience is not required. It can help, certainly. It can show kind of a direction and a focus, but not required. And so you should look to showcase your potential to conduct research and all of the things that you've done.
Thank you. And as far as showcasing your potential, right, it comes not just from the way you write about it, it's going to come from your uh, writers of the recommendation letters. So for question 4, Jennifer, you can begin. How much do you value who the recommendation writer is? For example, your PI, course instructor, or employer.
It's a great question. And everyone's coming from different backgrounds, right? Not everyone's coming from an academic background. Some people are already in industry and thinking, maybe I want to go back to grad school. For PhD, we always do like to see maybe one letter, at least one letter from somebody that can speak to the academic part of things. If you don't have that, it's not a deal breaker. But if you can try to get a letter from a professor or an advisor, that's a great thing. Employers are also great people to reach out to. Mentors are great people to reach out to. But you really want to choose people that know you well, that can speak to your potential, like we're saying, and make sure that they can write a strong letter for you. It's not a passive letter. It's not a generic letter. You want a unique, specific letter about your strengths.
Sabrina.
Yeah, so students are coming into graduate school from all different points in their lives, right? All different backgrounds, all different sets of circumstances. And I think the value of different types of letters very much aligns with that point in your life. So one of the colleges at Lehigh is a college of education, and most of the students who go into programs within the College of Education are going to be working professionals. Therefore, they may have lost touch with an advisor. Right? They may not have a professor that's like at the ready to write them a letter of recommendation because they finished their undergraduate degree more than 5 or 6 years ago. And that's okay. We look at employer letters in those programs highly favorably. If you are a traditional student looking to go into graduate school, meaning that you are out of college for less than a handful of years, an instructor, a research advisor is going to be highly recommended as your letter writer because these are individuals who can speak to your academic ability, your academic achievements, and your fit for graduate studies, maybe in a field that they're familiar with. But if you're out for longer than that, it is understood that it can be difficult to secure a letter from a professor if you have already had a whole work life behind you. So,
Yeah. Mariam.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Jennifer and Sabrina said. And I just want to emphasize that point about the letter writer should be a person that knows you well. And sometimes there's a trade-off between do I ask this famous professor whose lab I was in briefly, but I never really directly spoke to, or somebody else who knows me really well. And you should ask a person who knows you really well. Um, if you worked in a really big lab where you didn't have a lot of contact with the faculty member who ran it, you could consider asking if they could co-write a letter with, say, a postdoc or a graduate student who actually saw you around a little bit more and could speak more to your skills, because people are going to be looking for concrete, specific examples of you and your traits and your work ethics and your curiosity and your passion. And vague letters just don't carry a lot of weight, even if they're from professors, even if they're from people who are well known in the field.
Thank you. So I'll direct question 5 to Sabrina first. Are there any new trends in how graduate programs are evaluating or recruiting students?
well, I'm not sure that it's a trend, but I am going to say artificial intelligence, generative AI is going to be a big change maker in this. Um, Everything from the concerns that I think faculty have around personal statements being generated by AI, recommendation letters being generated by AI. I think these are concerns that are somewhat they're an undercurrent at Lehigh right now, but they're certainly something that I think admissions committees are starting to discuss and starting to think about how does that change our holistic process that we've adopted, right, since the pandemic, where we largely eliminated GREs, GMATs from consideration around graduate admissions. And so I think that we're going to see some changes as a result of AI, both in terms of policies that universities may post along with their applications, but also in terms of how they are stating evaluation processes, right, publicly. I think the other thing that's going to change is how we're using AI in evaluation. And so there are many programs, I'm guessing Mariam and Jennifer probably have hundreds, if not thousands, of applications to certain programs within their institutions. And I think that AI is going to serve a role in writing up summaries of things like transcripts that are difficult to go through individually if you're looking at 1,000 applications for a program. But I'm going to stop there. But I think AI it's a game changer, and I am hopeful that we are able to have it change things in a positive, equitable fashion. And I am deeply concerned about this.
It's a very big deal right now. I'm sure. Um, Mariam.
Yeah, maybe I'll follow up on that because I can see this as something that people will be thinking about a lot. And I guess my general advice would be to discourage the use of AI for the following reasons. First of all, I want to make a distinction between how you use AI. Sometimes people use AI to help them kind of clean up their writing in the sense of if they're not, if English is not their native language, it can be helpful in serving as like an editing tool. And I don't see any problem with that. I think the problem is with trying to use AI to generate your content from scratch. And one reason I'm going to strongly discourage that is that we're going to interview everybody that is shortlisted, and it's going to be clear like very quickly um, if if the person is not able to convey a depth of knowledge, for example, that was in their application. Um, a big part of the interview process is seeing how the candidate can answer questions and kind of feedback on what you're saying and have a dynamic, engaging conversation about research or academics or anything else. And so while you may find that an AI crafted essay could help you get through the first step, ultimately it is going to be you and only you that is evaluated. And so I think it's worth it to put in time to craft a personalized essay that reflects you as a person, and that's going to serve you best in the long run.
I'm going to speak a little bit more toward the recruiting process. So as I mentioned, I don't sit on an admissions committee. I do read applications, but I'm not making decisions on students. But what I can impact is our visibility. And so where are students seeing us and how are we getting the word out about Rice University? We are a small institution in Texas. We're not super well known outside of Texas, outside of academia. And so how do we make sure that our visibility is strong? And then also how do we make sure that students consider us as a strong choice? And the answer to that is giving our current students a voice, making sure that they can share their stories, making sure that they can share their road to grad school. And so I've heard from a lot of programs, I've gotten a lot of outreach over the past years of, hey, my program really wants to start a grad ambassadors program. Can you share the roadmap to this? And of course, we're very happy to do that. This is really about mentoring prospective students through what is a really difficult choice for them. And so I think you'll see a lot of that. And I wouldn't ignore those voices. The grad students in a program are going to give you very solid, very honest information. They have no reason to do otherwise. So make sure that you're asking those questions of current students. If you're wondering like, hey, is this faculty member taking students? Do they have funding for students? If you don't get a response in your outreach to the faculty, you can always reach out to the grad students. And so I would say that's going to be something that's going to be more important in the coming years, of these voices of current students, making sure that we as an institution kind of partner with our current students and help prospective students get good information for their future. So that's what I see happening in terms of recruitment.
Hey, thank you so much for all these really great answers. We are doing very well on time. So now we will be moving into the open-ended Q&A, where I'll be reading some of the questions from the attendees. And I think the way that we should do this is just, if you would like to answer the question, you have something to say about it, just feel free to unmute yourself and get to talking. We don't need an answer from every panelist for every question. So I'll begin with this first question from an anonymous attendee. Given the funding situation, will PhD applications become more competitive as there will be less funded places? Or how do you see the funding situation for research in the upcoming years?
In our program for this year, at least, there's no change in the number of slots we have. I asked for two, I got two. Last year, I asked for two, I got two. But psychology, a lot of the grad funding comes from teaching. And so that is currently not obviously affected by the federal funding situation for like NIH and NSF. Hard to say long term, but there might be a distinction between programs where graduate students do some teaching or extensive amounts of teaching, in which case their funding is more likely to be somewhat secure compared to programs where the graduate student is almost entirely funded by federal grants to the PI.
Add too that applying for fellowships is so important. I mean, even if you don't get that fellowship, just noting on your CV or your resume, this I've applied to this, it's in progress. I think that really says a lot to an admissions committee. You're putting yourself out there. And if you do have that funding, it makes you a more competitive applicant. It makes you able to have more choice in maybe who your advisor is going to be. So really want to stress, apply to that external funding. Just take the time and do that. It's possible that there will be some funding complications in the coming years for a lot of different reasons, and so always a great plan to think about how you can insure yourself against that.
And I want to add from the perspective of the types of programs that don't come with a lot of teaching obligations, right? So those that are funded largely by research dollars. I think what's going to happen, or what needs to happen across higher ed, is going to be in many ways a shift in the types of research that are getting done within, academic departments. And so I think as a student, one of the things that you can demonstrate if you're applying to a program or a faculty member's research group where you know that research funding is the way that you'll be supported, is to show that you are amenable to change, because research thrusts, trajectories, objectives may have to shift a little bit to align with funding availability, right? So being interested, for example, in alternative energy, just throw this out there. So we're receiving funding in alternative energy, but the types of research questions that are getting asked may be a little bit different than the types of research questions we would have asked 8 years ago. And so being amenable to that, recognizing that it is part of the research environment in which you find yourself, I think is a really important strength. And it's one that I think across the research enterprise of higher ed, we are going to have to lean into pretty heavily.
Thank you. And so, how big of a barrier do you think the current landscape presents to international students, and how should these students go about overcoming these barriers?
From an admission standpoint, I don't see it being a huge barrier except for the visa, the time to visa, getting the visa approved. And so the earlier you apply, hopefully the earlier you get a decision and the earlier you can start on that process. I think that's probably the most, from what I've heard, the most difficult, the most stressful part of it. But universities, institutions, we really want you here. We're looking for good students around the globe. We're really hoping that you will choose us and we will be a great fit for you. So don't let that discourage you, and plan early, plan for early.
The funding situation for international students also differs depending on whether the school is public or private. So in public schools, tuition is different if you're in state or out of state. And international students who are necessarily out of state and not eligible to have in-state tuition after, even if they're a resident for a year, will cost the school more. As far as I know, for private schools, this isn't like everybody costs the same, but somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. And so if you are applying to public schools, it might be, especially with programs where you are admitted to work with a certain faculty member, you might ask if the faculty member is accepting international students, just so you know, and don't waste your time if they say no. Beyond that, I just want to echo what Jennifer said. We really value having international students. I think the question for me is whether international students want to be here with us. It's a question that will require deep thought and consideration and planning, like Jennifer said.
Thank you. So, what is considered full-time research? I keep doing research during undergraduate and master study.
So I'm not 100% sure I understand the context of the question, so I'm going to give it the best shot that I have. So as a graduate student, right, full-time research, at least at Lehigh and I think many other institutions, is classified loosely as 20 hours a week, right? And that is how your research appointment is structured in terms of your appointment letter, where the additional hours in a week are meant to be used in taking classes and furthering your research project, etc. But if you are thinking about kind of full-time research in advance of graduate study, um, I think if you are doing research as an undergraduate student, as a master's student, to me, it doesn't actually matter if it is quote unquote full-time or not. What matters is that you are able to articulate the value of that research in the context of the graduate program or the program of study that you intend to enter. And so I don't know if I caught the spirit of the question. Hopefully that helps a little bit, though.
Thank you. Yeah, I believe that this probably was the context, um, just labels. Can I label this as full time? What's the qualification here? But yeah, thank you, Sabrina. For the next question from Jonathan Francor, would it still be valuable to mention classes or extracurricular activities that allowed you to do research, even if you had other lab work?
I think the CV is a great place to list everything that you think is relevant to the experience you're going to have in grad school. And that includes all kinds of research. And so if you had an REU program that was a short-term program, if you did a semester of research in somebody's lab, I would list all of it. I think that gives a really well-rounded picture of your potential to conduct academic research at the grad level.
Could you provide any advice on how to choose your papers to read and what else to address when one is writing, why they're interested in your research group?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot from students, and it's always a fun one for me to answer because I think there are multiple ways to think about it. And so, what I'll usually point students to is the first paper that you really want to read is going to be something that's very recent out of the lab, because that's going to be showing kind of what the group is doing right now, helps you think then about what you might be interested in contributing towards that type of research project, but also potentially gives you some areas to ask questions, right? If you do get the opportunity to interview with that faculty member. But the other side of that is don't miss the trajectory of that particular PI. And so I often will point students towards the more seasoned papers from a specific PI. Depending on how long the PI has been in the field, I call them the classics, right, of the field, because I think in many ways, understanding kind of how that mentor got to the research question that they're tackling today matters as you look at the trajectory of their career and map it to how you potentially are looking at your future career. So newest paper, and then read the things that are interesting to you that came from their past.
Yeah, I love seeing which papers students read and find most interesting because it differs so much across people and it really gives me a sense of your unique interests. And so don't feel like you have to choose the most cited paper or whatever else. Whatever you gravitate towards is really informative for me to know where your interests lie. I will say that one thing to be careful about is if the one paper you chose is one where I'm middle author and it's a side project and my lab actually doesn't do that work per se, um, and that's the one that you're most interested in, then my lab might not be the best one for you. And so if you find that the work that you're most interested in is not one that was actually a core feature of that PI's lab, you might consider looking up the lab that actually took a more prominent role in that project.
Okay, we have some questions regarding GPA, so I'll basically mash them together. But one attendee says that a colleague with a 3.9 was given an interview over one with 3.2. And just wondering, I guess, how that decision is made, preferring one applicant over another, if GPA is all that important. Um, and the other attendee asked, what's the impact of the low GPA on graduate admission, and what can applicants do to circumvent this?
Okay, well, I guess I'll start. Um, So GPA does matter. One of the things that I'll oftentimes tell students is that we tend to look at the later part of your GPA differently than we look at the early part of your GPA, and that the later part of your GPA, that you earned in the last couple of semesters, is going to be more critical because well, we all make a few mistakes as first year students, right? We all may have that mark on our record that doesn't make us proud, but certainly helped us learn how to double down in a field and learn at a high level. Um, that being said, we are looking at more than simply GPA. And so showcasing your overall portfolio and how specific courses within your academic trajectory may may have shaped you as a learner, as a scholar, as a student, I think can be really powerful in helping us maybe see beyond a simple number. So.
In my case, because I primarily admit students directly to work in my lab, I do have the luxury of deciding for myself how much I want to weight GPA, and I don't actually consider it that much. I've had a number of very successful students and lab managers that have had quite low GPAs. And for a while, actually, that was an accident because I literally didn't look at GPA. And then I was surprised years later to find out that some people had low GPAs. And I was like, would have never known because I didn't look. Um, I focus on the skills the person has shown and reasons why they might have had low GPA. Some students worked almost full time while in school. And I feel like in that context, I cannot ding them for having a low GPA. If they subsequently had research experience that showed that they are very able to learn really valuable skills that are important in the research setting, then I weigh that very heavily.
I'd also add, I think Sabrina had mentioned this, but just to add, if you're feeling some type of way about your GPA and you think, oh gosh, I don't know how this is going to be received, I had this bad semester, you can talk about that. One sentence in your SOP, address it, move on. That's not something, as Mariam said, that a lot of faculty are considering or looking at. But if you're worried about it and if it makes you feel better, just address it and move on and go from there.
An interesting case just popped into the questions. Do you get applicants who have previously failed or dropped out of grad school? Would you still consider these persons for admission? Any advice on how to best frame what they want to go into graduate school, why they want to go into graduate school again after having a bad experience?
Well, I'm going to throw a bit of a personal story out there. So this weekend, I got an email from a friend of mine in grad school. So she and I met in grad school, knew each other from the first day forward. And about 2.5 years in, she didn't fail out, but decided she was done. And she just up and left. The next year, she applied to another university, was accepted into a PhD program at that other university, and 2.5 years after that, up and left. She was having a lot of difficulty finding the right advisor. And so her third school that she was admitted to did, in fact, have a great fit for her in terms of advisor. But it was a long, long pathway. So I'm not saying it's not possible. I am saying that it is possible, but the story that she had to tell, right, about the fit with advisor, the fit with program, the fit with her professional goals, I think became more and more compelling as she went from a very traditional entry PhD student to what was a very non-traditional entry PhD student. Thrilled to report she has a PhD. She now has a wonderful career. She's enjoying life and every minute of it. But it was not an easy path for her to get there. And when I say that, PhD programs are a commitment, it's a commitment, and it's one that if the fit isn't great, can be difficult to navigate. Um, which I think I'd like to my colleagues to actually talk a little bit about fit, right? Because I think that's something we haven't really addressed here in a way that goes beyond the academic.
So I would say, you need to show your reasoning for this second attempt at grad school. Maybe you discovered something about yourself and you thought, okay, now I know what I want to do. How do you show that? As Sabrina mentioned, fit is really important. So do your research interests, do your academic interests align with the university that you're applying to? Does the university have faculty that are doing those things that you want to do? Is that going to enable you to do the things that you want to do with your career and your life by getting this degree from this program? So really important to show that in all of your application materials when you're deciding, yes, I do actually want to do this, and this is the new direction that I'm going to take.
I'm applying to an umbrella PhD program, which comes with rotations. But should I be worried if all my target faculty haven't responded to my email regarding their availability to accept rotations students, given that this info isn't on the program website?
No. And so the purpose of rotations, the purpose of the cohort-based admission is to give you more information about who you might work well with, about what that lab is like and what the research that they're doing is, if that aligns, the projects align with what you want to do. So it's not essential to have those faculty relationships built up if it's not a direct admission model. It's helpful. I would always encourage it, but don't be discouraged if you haven't gotten faculty to reach back out. And check with the grad students in the lab. It's always a really great way to get information.
We have two questions left, so we'll just get through them quickly, I think. Maybe just one panelist can answer each question. So what are some of the top factors that make a very well-rounded applicant? Which I think we spoke a lot about during this webinar, but I guess just reiterate some of the holistic nature of your review process.
I would show a lot of different things. You want to show the things that you were involved in school. That's what I'm always looking for. I'm looking for who's going to be the next students on my ambassador team. So what makes you passionate about your academics? Certainly. What makes you passionate about life? What do you like to do? What things have you been involved in? And that's not to say, as an undergrad, you have to be involved in every single thing. You have to be in every club. Show us what you're passionate about. And that's what I look for. That's how I determine if somebody's really well-rounded. Do they have passion for the academics, but also outside of the academics?
Should you add add a research experiment that I guess made it into methods uh, as your research experience?
I think it's good to highlight any research-related experiences that you've had. And so if you don't have that much in-lab experience, but you've had a chance to do research methods classes that give you training in research skills, then that's great to highlight.
Also be very clear about what the research experience is. So make sure that you're representing it well and we understand what you're trying to say about the experience.
Okay. So I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We are at time here. So I just want to say thank you to all the attendees for being here. We had a pretty good turnout. And thank you very, very much to all of the panelists. I think you've been so great and offered a lot of insight into the admissions process. So I'm really grateful to you for being here. And I wish everybody a great day and week.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.